Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy this story.
My name's Daniel Rusk, and I live on the edge of a quiet tree-lined cul-de-sac that was supposed to be the dream. Bought the place 10 years ago when my wife and I were expecting our first kid. She's gone now, divorce, but I stuck around because it's home. I like the quiet, or I did until a bunch of neighbors decided to play pretend government. It started subtly. Flyers showed up in mailboxes with clean fonts and official-looking seals that read Willow Bend Community Standards Committee. No one had heard of it, including me, and I'd lived here longer than anyone on my block. A few neighbors thought maybe the city had started something new. Others, like old Mr. Green at the end of the block, just ignored it. I read the thing 3 times. It said the WBCSC was forming to help protect property values and maintain aesthetic harmony. It asked, no, instructed homeowners to attend a community meeting at Karen Simmons' house. Yeah, Karen. Her name was really Karen, blonde, 50s, always wearing pastel tennis skirts and pretending her husband wasn't hiding in his garage to avoid her. She'd recently started talking to people about how our street was slipping. At first I figured it was the usual neighborly power trip. Some people crave a clipboard in their hands and a title, even if they made it up themselves. I didn't plan to go, but then Karen showed up at my door with 2 others. Brian Jacobs, who used to run a failing lawn service, and Lisa Morrell, who walks her chihuahua through everyone's yard like it's a parade route. Daniel, Karen said, putting on that voice people use when they're about to say something awful and pretend it's friendly, we really need you at the meeting. What meeting? I asked. The Willow Bend CSC, you got the flyer. Yeah, I thought it was junk. Brian cleared his throat. It's not junk, it's community improvement. Karen added, we're voting on new neighborhood standards, and participation is expected. Expected by who? I asked. Karen's lips tightened and she looked to Lisa. Lisa offered me a stapled packet. Here's a copy of the proposed guidelines. If you don't show, we'll assume you agree. That did it. I took the packet and told them I'd see them there, but not because I wanted to, because I needed to know what kind of insanity was crawling up my front steps. The meeting was packed into Karen's living room, with folding chairs and a PowerPoint on her TV. Karen stood in front like a game show host, clicker in hand. She introduced the provisional board, which included herself as president, Brian as compliance director, and Lisa as secretary. No one else had been invited to run. They outlined their vision: regular inspections of properties, garage checks every 2 weeks, trash bin alignment requirements, even seasonal decor guidelines. I laughed out loud when Karen announced a $50 fine for each day your leaves weren't cleared from the sidewalk. Leaves? You're going to fine us for leaves? I said. Karen looked at me over her glasses. Falling debris impacts curb appeal, Daniel, Brian added. It's not personal. Just structure. It's fake, I said. There's no HOA here. We didn't agree to anything like this when we bought our homes, Lisa piped up. That's what the new Community Standards Agreement is for. We're asking everyone to sign it and commit. A few neighbors looked confused. Some glanced at each other, but others were nodding. That's what scared me. Karen walked over to a table and held up a binder. We'll be collecting signatures after the meeting. It's entirely voluntary, but non-participation may be noted in our records. What records? I asked. Our internal tracking system, Brian said. You made up a spreadsheet? I asked. That's your enforcement. Karen's voice got sharper. This isn't a joke. If you don't want to be part of a cleaner, more respectful community, then you'll be noted as disruptive. I stood up. You're not a government. You're not even a legal board. This is a power trip, and it stops at my property line. That ended the meeting for me, but not for them. Over the next few days, neighbors started folding under the pressure. Karen and her group went door to door pushing for signatures. I heard they told one guy he'd be labeled as non-cooperative in neighborhood directories they were planning to make. Another neighbor said they warned her she might not get full consideration for help if she ever needed a community favor. 2 weeks later, I got the first letter. It was printed on heavy paper and shoved under my door. It said my garage needed to be inspected for compliance. I tossed it in the trash. A few days after that, I noticed Karen and Brian standing at the foot of my driveway. I opened my front door and Karen waved. Daniel, your garage check is overdue. Still not happening, I called back. Brian stepped forward. You're the only one who hasn't complied. We have the authority. You have nothing, I said. No contract, no authority. If you set foot on my property, I'll have you trespassed. They left. But they weren't done. One night I was watching TV when I heard a loud thunk outside. Then another. I stepped onto the porch and saw flashlights moving near my garage. I grabbed a bat and ran outside. Brian and another guy the first didn't recognize were prying at the side door of my garage. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. Brian dropped the crowbar. "Garage inspection," I pointed the bat. "Step away or I call the cops." The other guy muttered something and took off. Brian hesitated, then followed. The next morning I found fresh saw marks at the base of the oak trees near the curb. Deep ones. Someone had started to cut them. I called the police, filed a report, told them about the fake HOA. The officer raised his eyebrows when I explained the whole mess. "I've heard of some nutty neighborhood groups," he said. "But this is next level." "You think they'll stop?" I asked. He shrugged. "Depends how far they think they can go." That's when I decided it was time to fight back. It started with cameras. I put up a few around the property, 2 hidden in the hedges and 1 inside the garage. I wasn't taking chances. My oak trees weren't just trees. They'd been here longer than the whole damn subdivision, towering like silent witnesses, and someone had tried to kill them in the dead of night. I wasn't the only one getting pressure. Across the street, a retired schoolteacher named Dolores, tough as nails, walks with a cane she carved herself, knocked on my door one morning. "You got one of these?" she asked, holding a notice that looked a lot like mine. "Garage inspection?" I asked. "Yep. And they told me if I didn't let them in, they'd report me for storing unregistered materials." Whatever that means. We sat on my porch drinking coffee and comparing notes. Turns out they'd also told her she was in violation for painting her shutters non-neutral beige. Dolores said Karen had stood in her driveway for a full 10 minutes arguing that beige had shades. That's when I started documenting. Every letter, every note, every word they said. I bought a small voice recorder and kept it in my shirt pocket just in case they tried something in person again. I figured if this ever went legal, and I was starting to think it might, I'd need all the evidence I could get. It didn't take long before I had more than I ever wanted. Brian showed up 2 days later and took pictures of my backyard from my neighbor's yard. I only found out because Jeremy next door saw him and thought he was a burglar. Brian told him, "Just checking for structural irregularities." Jeremy thought he was joking, until Karen showed up an hour later with Lisa and handed me a second notice, this one for an unauthorized gardening structure. It was a potting bench. "Your structure is visible from the road," Lisa said, pointing at the backyard. "It's behind a 6-foot fence," I replied. "You had to spy through the neighbor's yard." Karen looked me dead in the eye and said, "Per community standards, anything visible at an angle is subject to review." That's when I realized this wasn't just about them wanting control. They wanted to punish anyone who wouldn't play along. It wasn't enough that I hadn't signed the agreement. I had to be made into an example. Dolores got it worse. She found a pink slip taped to her mailbox saying she was officially on probation for violating shutter policy, garage access, and inflammatory remarks. I asked her what that last part meant. I told Karen her power trip was boring and she should take up knitting. A week later, her trash cans disappeared. She found them dumped in the woods 3 blocks away. When she called the police, they chalked it up to teenage pranksters. When she called me, I told her we needed to organize. It wasn't just us. Jeremy was getting notices about his non-compliant driveway hue. Apparently his concrete was too dark after sealing it. Abby and Malik down the block were fined twice for having a guest park on the street overnight, despite no actual law or HOA rule existing. That's when I created a private group chat, invite only. We called it the Block Resistance. Within 3 days we had 12 households in. Within a week we had 20. And we started collecting stories. One guy caught Lisa standing in his yard measuring the distance between his lawn gnomes. A mom with twins got a letter saying her stroller, left on the porch, was visual clutter. Karen wrote it herself. The straw that really cracked it open happened the night Karen tried to host a mandatory neighborhood forum at her house. She even had printed name tags with everyone's assigned committee roles. Mine said Lawn Compliance Liaison. I didn't go, neither did most of the people in the resistance. The next morning my mailbox had been opened and stuffed with crumpled trash. Dolores found dog poop in her driveway. Jeremy's water hose was slashed. They were retaliating, subtle, petty, but persistent. So I brought in my brother. Rob's a lawyer, corporate mostly but sharp. He drove out that Saturday with a stack of notes and a tape recorder. "You sure they never filed anything with the city?" he asked. "Nothing. I checked. This is all off the books." "Good. That makes them private citizens acting under false authority. If you have recordings and documents, you've got a real case, possibly even civil harassment and property damage." I handed him the folder. It had copies of all the notices, dates, and even photos of the tree cuts, trash, and one grainy camera still of Brian in the backyard. Rob shook his head. "This is a mess, but it's all something we can work with." He helped us draft a cease and desist letter, not just to Karen, but to each member of the fake board. We had it served through a courier, with signatures required. The responses came quick. Lisa tried to play innocent. She claimed she was just the secretary and wasn't aware of most of the activities. Brian got aggressive. He sent an email threatening to countersue for slander. Karen, she doubled down. She posted on the neighborhood bulletin board, a cork strip on the trail path, claiming we were dangerous radicals trying to ruin community peace. She accused me, Dolores, and Jeremy by name of inciting division and committing targeted attacks on civic unity. She even hosted a Facebook Live with her 2 loyal followers where they talked about how our street was under threat from domestic extremism. Rob watched it with me and said, "Keep recording. Let her talk." Then Karen made the biggest mistake of all. She filed a complaint with the city claiming we were operating an illegal short-term rental ring. She included false images and listed us as violators. The problem was, she submitted it using the official Willow Bend CSC name, which wasn't registered or recognized. That triggered a chain reaction. City officials came to inspect, and after some confused questions, left with more concern about the people pretending to be a governing body than anything else. They opened a review into the so-called CSC. It wasn't long before the city lawyer called Rob. "Are you representing a client in Willow Bend?" "I am. Multiple households. And we're considering civil litigation." "Well, we may want to coordinate. What you've got on record could help us take action." Karen had no idea what was coming. Rob returned the next weekend. This time he brought someone with him, Savannah Gentry, a paralegal with a spine of steel and a binder under one arm that looked like it could stop a bullet. Savannah didn't waste any time. She walked in with a no-nonsense attitude, her eyes sharp and focused. That binder wasn't just for show. It was packed with folders, papers, and tabs marking every piece of dirt she'd dug up on Karen Simmons and the fake HOA crew. She didn't even sit down before flipping through the pages with practiced speed. Like she already knew every detail but was making sure nothing was missed. Her presence alone felt like a warning. This wasn't some amateur neighborhood dispute anymore. This was serious, and Savannah was ready to tear it apart. "Karen Simmons," she said as she flipped through her pages, not looking up. "She's been listed on 3 different complaints, all within the last 2 years, unrelated to this. She's a pattern." Her voice was steady but firm, each word landing like a hammer strike. She started listing off the complaints like they were routine, but behind each one was a story of harassment, false reports, and manipulation. One complaint was about her filing bogus noise violations against neighbors in a condo complex, just to push her own agenda. Another involved her trying to strong-arm a neighborhood association by forging meeting minutes to create new rules nobody agreed to. The third was a harassment claim. She was taking photos of a family's children and accusing them of unsafe play, whatever that means. These aren't accidents or misunderstandings. This is a clear pattern of abuse of whatever influence she can grab. Savannah paused, then closed the binder slowly, making sure the weight of what she said sank in. Rob was less interested in Karen's history and more focused on the legal structure or lack of one. This fake committee? They've been acting under a name that doesn't exist. There's no charter, no incorporation, no approval from the city. That's impersonating a governing body. It might even cross into fraud. That was enough to make a few of the quieter neighbors come out of the shadows. Ellie from 4 doors down invited us in one night after dark. She looked over her shoulder like someone might be listening. "I signed the paper," Ellie admitted, her voice low and hesitant like she was confessing something she still felt guilty about. She twisted her hands in her lap, eyes darting toward the window as if afraid someone might overhear. "I didn't really know what I was agreeing to. They made it sound harmless at first, like it was just a neighborhood watch or something. But then Lisa came around, and she was different. She said if I didn't sign, my mail might start going missing. Not just delayed, but actually disappear. Things happen when you're not cooperative," she told me. Like it was some kind of secret code. It scared me more than I expected. I looked at her, trying to hold back the frustration bubbling inside. "Who exactly told you that?" I asked quietly. Hilly swallowed and answered, "Lisa. She's the one who came to the door, real friendly, but there was something in her eyes. Like she wasn't just asking, she was warning." She paused, then added, "I thought it was ridiculous at first. Who steals mail in a neighborhood? But then stuff started going missing from my porch, packages, letters. At first I thought maybe the mailman messed up, but after a while I wasn't so sure anymore. That wasn't the only story I heard. Vince, a burly guy who always kept his golden retriever on a leash, told me he only signed the papers because Karen had threatened his wife. Karen came by and told my wife that if our dog kept barking, she'd be reported for a nuisance. Said the city might fine us or worse. Small threats, she called them, Vince said, shaking his head. But those small things add up. At first you laugh it off. Then it starts wearing you down. Every knock on the door feels like a warning. Every letter in the mailbox feels like a trap. You start believing they have the power to ruin you if you don't play along. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all settle in the room. It's like psychological warfare disguised as neighborhood rules, Vince agreed. Exactly. And when people are scared like that, they don't fight back. They just sign and hope it goes away. It was intimidation dressed as friendliness, the kind that sneaks up on you behind a clipboard and a fake smile. The threats weren't loud or obvious. They whispered, nudged, and piled up until people started second-guessing every decision they made on their own property. But that was over now. We had leverage. Testimonies, video clips, signed statements, and one ridiculously thick binder Savannah had turned into a weapon of precision. Every tab, every page, every screenshot was proof. And armed with that, we didn't hold back anymore. We called meetings, knocked on doors, passed out copies of the fake bylaws next to actual city codes. We made it public. We made it loud. Dolores printed out her violation notices and pinned them to her fence. Jeremy held a backyard barbecue and invited only those who'd refused to sign, which ended up being nearly half the block. I walked from house to house collecting fresh affidavits. And Karen, she doubled down. She posted laminated signs around the neighborhood, actual laminated signs with bold red letters, in cooperative homes subject to neighborhood accountability. Rob sent her a second cease and desist. She ignored it. Then she made another bold move. She tried to get Brian hired as a compliance consultant by the City Code Enforcement Office. We found out when someone at City Hall forwarded Rob an internal memo with Brian's name in the subject line. He'd pitched himself as a neighborhood advisor with active case experience. That's when we stopped pulling punches and hit back with everything we had. Rob and Savannah helped us file a formal complaint with the city attorney's office. It included over 20 statements, multiple video files, the false complaint submission Karen made, and more. We filed it as a community group, and we called ourselves exactly what Karen had labeled us: the Willow Bend Resistance. 2 weeks later, a city investigator came to the neighborhood. He wasn't alone. He had 2 uniformed officers and a representative from the Office of Neighborhood Affairs. They knocked on Karen's door first. She didn't answer. Neither did Brian. Lisa opened her door but shut it immediately when she saw the clipboard. The rest of us watched from our windows and porches. Nobody said a word. But you could feel the shift. For once it wasn't them knocking on our doors. It was the real authority. The city posted notices at every public entrance to the neighborhood. No recognized homeowners association or community governance body exists within Willow Bend. Rob couldn't stop grinning. That's official language for shut it down, but Karen didn't stop. She started hosting meetings at her house again, this time under the name Willow Bend Civic Watch. Same faces, same harassment, new stationery. So Rob filed the lawsuit. It was civil, it was clean. It named Karen, Brian, and Lisa. The charges: harassment, trespassing, property damage, and fraudulent misrepresentation. We raised funds from neighbors, and Dolores even put in a chunk from her retirement. I'd rather fight now, she said, than die staring at a lawn inspection notice. The pressure got to them. Lisa cracked first. She posted a rambling apology online about being manipulated, about not really understanding what she was involved in. She removed herself from the Civic Watch the next day. Brian tried to act like none of it bothered him, but when process servers showed up at his door, he lost it. Word spread he'd shouted at them and thrown a potted plant. And Karen held her ground like a statue in a hurricane. She stopped walking the block and started sending letters again. She mailed them from out of town. Her return address was a P.O. box in a different county. We didn't know it yet, but she was getting ready to vanish. By the time the court date was announced, the neighborhood had completely fractured. It wasn't just us versus Karen anymore. Some of her old supporters had peeled off, quietly pulling down the signs and removing the CSC flyers from their windows. A few went even further. Vince's wife apologized to Dolores in person and brought over a casserole like we were living in the 1950s. Jeremy called it the pre-lawsuit panic bake. The day before the hearing, Rob warned us, these cases don't end with fireworks, but if we play it smart, we can make them feel the heat. We showed up with 3 binders, 8 witnesses, and 2 letters from the city confirming no such HOA or committee had ever been recognized or legally registered. Karen showed up late by herself, wearing sunglasses and carrying a stack of her own papers, most of which we'd later find out were just duplicate copies of the same fake bylaws she'd been pushing for months. When the judge asked her for her credentials, she replied, "I represent the homeowners who actually care about Willow Bend." That didn't go over well. The hearing dragged on for hours. Rob was surgical, calm. He played audio clips of Brian threatening to enter my garage, showed timestamps of Lisa measuring lawn decorations, and read the full text of the fake violation letters. One by one we gave our accounts. Dolores read hers like she was back in front of a classroom. Jeremy was more blunt. They tried to run this place like a prison yard. Karen never broke down, not once. She didn't cry or raise her voice. She just stared, occasionally flipping a page or scribbling in a legal pad she never looked at again. Her answers got vaguer by the minute. When asked about the tracking spreadsheet, she said it was in development. When asked to produce the original community agreement she'd claimed residents signed, she said it had been lost due to formatting issues. Brian didn't even show. Lisa filed a statement saying she was no longer involved. Her name stayed on the lawsuit by the end. The judge didn't rule immediately. He said he would issue a decision within 2 weeks. That wait nearly tore the rest of us apart. We kept meeting, talking, watching every move Karen made. But something had shifted. People who had once stood with her now crossed the street to avoid her. Vince told me he hadn't spoken to Brian since the barbecue. Lisa's house sat silent. No dog, no visitors, nothing but silence behind the blinds. And then Karen disappeared, literally. 2 days before the ruling, Mateo, the guy who walks every morning at 5 a.m. with a headlamp and a coffee cup, saw a U-Haul in front of her place. No movers, no helpers. Just Karen, pacing the lawn in a hoodie and jeans, hauling boxes with the garage door wide open. He said she looked paranoid, flinching at every sound. By the time the sun rose, she was gone. The mailbox was locked. A few trash bags were left near the curb, half torn from the wind. Her flower beds had withered. Even the fake security camera on her porch had been ripped down. When the ruling came in, it was everything we hoped for. The court found that Karen, Brian, and Lisa had engaged in repeated harassment, impersonated a governing authority, and caused measurable damages through their actions. Each of them was ordered to pay restitution to multiple households, including mine. Karen's share alone was over $18,000. Brian owed $14,000. Lisa was ordered to pay $5,000. Rob filed liens when the payments didn't come. Karen's property, already abandoned, went into default. The county seized it and eventually sold it off. Brian's house hit the market 3 weeks later, listed quietly without a single word about community governance. Lisa, who by then had moved to Florida, reached a settlement with the group and signed a formal apology. We had it framed in Dolores's kitchen, right above her wooden spoon collection. But the wind didn't feel the way we expected. There were no fireworks, no victory parade, just quiet. The signs were gone, the flyers stopped, the mailbox warnings disappeared, and for once no one was watching our hedges grow. We kept the group together, not the resistance anymore. We renamed it Watchdog, not to control, just to make sure something like this never got off the ground again. Ellie runs it now. She's good at sniffing out weird behavior before it starts. We meet every 2 months, not to make rules, just to keep each other sane. Dolores started gardening again. Her shutters are now aggressively orange, as she puts it, just to make a point. Jeremy turned his garage into a recording studio. Ellie put up a sign in her yard that reads Lawn Freedom Zone. As for me, I still wave at neighbors. I still sit on my porch with a cold beer when the sun goes down. I fixed the scratch on my garage door, but left a tiny piece of it unpainted. A reminder, the trees still standing, still strong, like they knew we'd weather the storm. And if someone else tries to form another fake board, they'll find this street isn't as quiet as it used to be. We've got a backbone now. We've got each other. Karen's gone. The fake HOA is gone. The damage they did, that'll take time. But the neighborhood, it's ours again. And this time we're the ones keeping watch. Oh cool, a bunch of middle-aged control freaks played make-believe government and nearly drove a quiet neighborhood into madness. Karen, Brian, Lisa, what were they thinking? That no one would notice their HOA cosplay. This is what happens when you give people a shred of imaginary authority and no hobbies. These folks were drunk on nothing but power over lawn chairs and leaf piles. And they broke into garages? That's not civic involvement, that's straight-up criminal. If anyone needs re-education in how society works, it's them. And let's not let the coward crew off the hook either. The sheep who signed up stayed quiet, and only turned on the fake board when it got legally messy. You don't get to ride both sides. You let a dictator rise and only flinched when the heat got turned up. Spineless. The worst kind of neighbor is the one who smiles while handing over your name to people with clipboards. Glad Karen vanished. Hope she finds a new neighborhood full of other self-proclaimed block captains. They can battle over mailbox alignment and choke on their fake bylaws. This is the kind of psychotic HOA garbage that gives decent neighborhoods a bad name. These idiots invented fake fines, fake inspections, and then tried to fine people for leaves. Leaves. What's next? Citations for clouds casting shadows. Karen didn't just overstep, she launched a full-scale invasion of reality. And let's be honest, she didn't vanish. She ran, like a scam artist skipping town before the check clears. Brian and Lisa were just henchmen with too much free time and not enough brain cells to realize they were complicit in harassment. These people deserve to be blacklisted from owning property, anywhere. Let them live in tents, preferably far away from decent society. The most enraging part of this story isn't even Karen. It's how long this circus was allowed to go on. Where were the cops, the city, the real authorities? It took video evidence, lawyers, and 20 neighbors just to prove that some bored retirees with a printer weren't a government. That's terrifying. It shows how easy it is to weaponize bureaucracy and peer pressure if nobody's paying attention. And the psychological warfare, that's real. Telling people their dogs might get reported, warning about mail going missing, fake neighborhood directories. This wasn't just about lawn decor. It was control through fear, straight-up domestic terror light. If Rob hadn't shown up, they'd probably still be handing out laminated threats and forcing people to scrub their curbs. This wasn't neighborhood drama. This was a slow coup by polyester tyrants. Burn it all down, rebuild with decent humans.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.